Hello YouTube, Message in a Bottle here. Now, I made a short video discussing about my plans of making a video about what's essentially wrong with me. And I was using the quote of Frederick Douglass. Funny enough, I found a picture of this quote and I had it in my cell phone the entire time. But I want to share this quote to you guys, the viewers, to understand where I'm coming from. As the quote states, as you see here, it is easier to build a strong children than to repair a broken man. Now that quote really did stuck with me because the more I think about it, the more I realize how childhood is essentially very important stage of any individual life, and depending how bad or how good a person's childhood is, you know, it's gonna reflect a lot when they become adults. Now, me, I'm a grown ass man, so I do have issues. I'm not gonna lie, I do have issues. But I always try my best to keep those issues to myself because one of the main lessons that I learned when it comes to being an adult is that if you want to have a good day, if you want to have good relationship, make some boundaries within yourself and with others. Make some boundaries with your environment. To give you a good example, and this is a life lesson that I learned the hard way, and I will never repeat this mistake again. And if I do make this mistake, it's on me, absolutely on me. One of the life lessons I learned is essentially keep your work life and your personal life separate. And the more you do it, the better it is. Trust me, it's gonna pay off. And sadly, though, we live in a world where sometimes people kind of mix their personal life with their work, and eventually they're gonna learn the hard way why that is. Why you should not shit where you eat. Do not, you know, bite the hand that feeds you. A lot of people are gonna learn that lesson the hard way. And because we kind of devolving with, how do I say this, communication, like I feel like a lot of people are becoming more autistics in the terms of communication. Like people are having a hard time communicating with each other, which is ironic because we're living in the internet age where supposedly we could communicate with anyone around the world, and yet we have a hard time properly communicating with other people. So because of that, people tend to shit where they eat, especially at work, and socialize with the people at work. And a lot of people are gonna have a wake up call later in life, realizing how it's literally important to keep your work life and your personal life separate. But anyway, I'm getting a little derailed. This is just one of the many examples many example of a life lesson that I learned over the years. But the video, what I really wanted to discuss that relates to this picture that you see here, it's essentially what's wrong with me and, you know, why I'm the way it is. It really starts with my childhood, and I was raised in definitely a broken home where my mom and my biological dad, they tried, like they really did try, but when I look back in my memories, I feel like my parents, they did not plan me. Like they were not ready, period. And to give you guys an idea of what I'm saying, like they did not plan me. None of my siblings, they're full blooded. All my siblings, they're half bloods. And me, I feel like I was the only child that was legitimate from my biological father. Every other kids, they're, you know, some other dudes' children. And I know that sounds terrible, but, you know, that's the environment I grew up in. And when I was a little kid, I clearly remember that I did have friends. I did have childhood friends where I hang out with and go to their house and, you know, play with them. And at the same time, they went to my house and We play video games. At that time, because I'm a 90s kid, we didn't have smartphones, so for those of you guys know the good old days, you know, we sometimes have Nintendo 64 or PlayStation 1. We come over to other people's houses and play video games with the diagonal and have the controller, connected with one gaming console. Those were the good old days, and in those days, you literally had to talk to people face to face and, you know, communicate, like socialize, etc., etc. So you could say my social skills peaked in my childhood, but I clearly remember when it started to decline, and that's around middle school. And the reason why is because my parents, they frequently move around, and this is where my mother made a huge mistake, and I feel like this is all my mother's fault, but sadly, we live in a world where women sometimes get away with their bullshit and their accountability. Like, they will not accept accountability, they'll play the victim. And I feel like if my mother just planned things correctly and have a little self control, maybe things will play out differently, but she does not want to admit that it's her fault. And I feel like later in life, what happened to her happened for a reason, which it's gonna sound horrible when I say it, guys, but I'll explain more later down the line. But just to focus on my childhood, to focus the story of my childhood, essentially around middle school, that's when I started losing friends. That's when I started to become more isolated. And the main reason why is because my mother, she kind of got scared the way I was growing up in a bad neighborhood. Because when you're growing up in a poor area where there's a lot, quote unquote, gang violence, you start to see some crazy stuff. Like, I clearly remember when I was 6 years old, I saw a shooting happen outside of my house. And because of that, my mother was kind of scared that I was gonna socialize with the wrong group and, you know, start going out with the wrong crowd. So what she did instead is kind of like isolate me, and that's where I started to play some video games. And my video game addiction kind of got worsened when my biological father, he was like a gaming addict. Now, my biological father, he loves video games. He was the one that introduced me to Nintendo 64, the original Mortal Kombat, Sonic the Hedgehog 2. I clearly remember that those type of games. And my biological father, he even worked at a privately owned video game store. I clearly remember that. And when I was a little child, during summer vacation, my pops, he will take me to his job, and I get to chill at the privately owned video game store. I went upstairs because I remember it was a two-story building, and at the second building there was like a mini living room, and I get to like hang out there and play all the video games that I wanted. And I clearly remember that, my pops, he was kind of happy. He was happy, but at the same time, he was not making good amount of money, and that's where I feel like the relationship between my biological father and my mother went downhill, because my biological father, he was not ambitious. He was a type of dude that, well, where everything starts to be comfortable for him, he would just lay back and start being lazy. And honestly, I'm kind of like that too, especially me right now as a grown ass man, but I'm trying my best to push myself to the limit. I'm trying my best to keep pushing myself, keep moving forward, because, well, I'll explain later, guys. It just, now I understand that me as a man, I should always be ambitious no matter what, because you guys are gonna understand something important down the line when it comes to having a relationship with a woman. But anyway, back to my childhood story. Eventually, because my mother was noticing my pops, he was just being comfortable, the way he is, the way the lifestyle is. Eventually, my mother kind of fell out of love of him and started cheating on him. And me at the time, because I was a little child, um, I assumed my stepdad was like another dad, if that makes any sense. And eventually, my biological father, he noticed that my stepdad was around a little too more than too often. And sometimes my stepdad, he would like do some favors for my mother, and eventually they slept with each other. It kind of flew over my head what they were doing at that time, but now, me as a grown ass man, I knew what my stepdad was doing with my mother. But it flew over my head why my stepdad keeps, coming to the house and doing favors for my mother. But yeah, now I know why. And one day, he fixed a window, and I clearly remember this because this was the turning point of my biological father's relationship with my mother. My stepdad fixed a window on the house that was broken for a while, and my biological father noticed the window was fixed, and that's where I kind of snitched on my mother, telling my biological father that, there's another dad that's coming here to fix, and, having happy times with my mom. My biological father obviously did not like that. As a matter of fact, he kind of knew what I meant. And at the time, I was like 6 years old or 4 years old. I really don't remember exactly how old I was, but I clearly remember I was in elementary school, so like in the first grade or second grade. Because once my dad left me, I was still elementary school. But my biological dad, he wanted custody on me, but because he was lazy and my mother kind of proved it, the court kind of favored my mother over that incident. And because of that, wish he's gone. So, how does that affect me later in life? Well, it's kind of obvious, guys. Like, when it comes to women, you gotta stay ambitious. Especially when, after the lessons I learned from my first girlfriend, which I'll talk about in a later video because I don't want to make this video too long, but yeah. You, for us, man, we gotta stay ambitious because otherwise a woman will fall out of love. And even if a woman cheats on you, still stay ambitious, guys, because it's gonna benefit yourself later down the line. And more importantly, it's gonna be easier, much easier to replace a woman. And that is where a woman will stay with you, because if she knows that you could easily replace her with another woman, then she will try to mate guard with you just in case. Trust me on that one. But anyway, back to the topic. And when my biological father left me, I felt like, in terms of socialness, me being socially, like, being around with people, it started to decline in that area because I clearly remember when in middle school I tried to make friends, but I never. Middle school, that's when you could say that I haven't like been invited to parties. I haven't properly socialized with other people. I did stay after school to focus on homework because I'll admit, when it comes to school, I'm not very focused, and being a focused student, that's kind of hard on me. Like, maybe I have minor ADHD or something like that, but when it comes to focusing on materials, especially on school, I have a hard time doing that. So, in middle school, I did struggle. But there was a point in middle school where I started to become a good student and I started to had a GPA of 3.5, almost a 4.0 at one point, and that's because I started to develop a rhythm. But once again, what happened at home really did trouble me, and it got even worse with the fact that I kind of like my social skills kind of like went on stalemate, if that makes any sense. Like, I didn't socialize with the other kids. I didn't hang out with other kids. The only time I hang out was after school programs. But even then, I didn't really like got invited to other people's party. Then I got to hang out with other kids' homes and play video games. All I did is watch TV. And when I get home, aside from doing homework, I watch a lot of TV and I did play a lot of video games. But those video games that I was playing, they were essentially my parents, well, my biological father, video game stuff. Because when he left me, he tried to like leave behind some video games for I could enjoy. And at that time, I developed a video game addiction just to, you know, not get myself bored. But more importantly, I started to like also watch a lot of TV because at that time I was kind of trying to escape from some issues that was happening at home. Number one, my mother was working a lot. She worked so much that sometimes I don't see her throughout the day. And number two, because I'm not socializing with other people, like with other kids, I end up, you know, being alone in my house. And essentially, you could say that social isolation, that's where I'm starting to get used to it, but it really did damage me. I'm not gonna lie, it really did damage me. One time, I clearly remember when I was like back in elementary. No, I think this was even earlier because. Okay, this was much earlier because I remember my biological father was still around before they broke up. But one of my darkest childhood memories is when both of my parents were working, and my mother, she had to leave to, to get something done. So she left me behind at the apartment, and because very, I felt very lonely at that time, that I wanted to like run around and hang out with other people. I clearly remember that I opened the apartment door and started to run around the hallway of the apartment and essentially chat with my neighbor. But when my mother came back, she got so pissed that she picked up a knife and I ran to my room and she threatened to stab me. Why I opened the door and, run around the apartment complex. At that time, I was like very little. I think I was like 4 years old or 4 or 5 years old. I really don't remember, but I clearly remember she did that, and I was legitimately terrified. Like my own mother is trying to stab me. But at that time, I was, a little kid, socially isolated. So I really wanted to make some friends. But my parents, they constantly worked so much that I ended up being alone at the house all by myself, nothing but the TV and the video games. And that's what essentially that was essentially my childhood. You could say that in terms of social skills and social, you know, being social, it peaked in definitely around elementary school when my parents moved away from the apartment and got our own house. But that's at the same time when my mother got her own house, that's when things declined because that's when a lot of dramas happened in my childhood life. And then you could say that my social isolation uh, worsened from there, which I'll discuss more in later down the line. But essentially, what I want to summarize, guys, is this: um, me, I'm kind of like socially retarded. I have a hard time socializing with people, and so when people get to meet me and talk to me in real life, I'm kind of socially awkward. I am a goofball and I manage to make people laugh, but what's essentially wrong with me is, my social skills. And it all stems from my childhood of how I was raised. And throughout my childhood, I was essentially socially isolated because of my parents. And I feel like my parents, they did not plan me. Like, I wasn't meant to be born, but hey, here I am. Here I am existing. And all my siblings, they're half bloods. None of them are full blood siblings. And this, affected me how I was raised. And the saddest thing about it is that my parents, they do not want to accept the responsibility or what damage they did on me. They might have accepted it at one point, but at the same time, because I'm a grown ass man right now, they they expect whatever issue I have to fix it. And that's the problem, guys. Like, this is why I'm presenting this quote to you guys. It's easier to build a strong children than repair a broken man. It's because if you guys don't raise a child right, they're gonna end up being broken people, just like me. And this is the message that I'm trying to amplify to everyone here. And I have a feeling that a lot of people like me, they had, similar issues growing up. I mean, look at society right now. We have a hard time, people trying to look for dates. We have a hard time, people trying to form families properly. And even communication, like basic human communication and human connection, people are having issues of doing that as well. Well, guys, I'm gonna end it here, but I will continue this series. And I'm sorry if I'm all over the place, but I will try my best to, make the story sound corrected. But that was essentially my childhood, witnessing family drama, being socially isolated. And the saddest part is I didn't have a choice. I clearly remember one time in my childhood that I saw two kids that I knew that were my best friend. They were my neighbors. I saw my neighbor that was sort of my best friend at that time, and I wanted to play with them, but because my mother was busy and at the same time she had personal drama with the neighbors, which my mother, she always had trauma, like she always had issues with people. I don't know why, but because she had drama with the neighbor, she did not let me play with the neighbor's kid, and me, I was crying because I wanted to play with them. And at that time I was like 6 or 5 years old. I wanted to like socialize, play with other kids, but my mother did not let me. So that was my childhood, like social isolation without a choice. And the saddest part is that because my mother was very hot headed, whenever I get upset, my mother would beat me to a pulp to just to shut the hell up. Like one time I clearly remember I got upset with my mother and I kinda raised my voice, and when I did, she punched me in the nose and I was suffering a nosebleed. So yeah, that was my childhood right there. But anyway guys, I'm gonna end it here and I'll make more videos about myself. Thank you guys for listening and enjoy your rest of the week. Goodbye.